Bobby, so let's have some fun and switch roles for a second. If you had, if you had to pitch Visionaries Club to founders in just 1 minute, what would your elevator pitch sound like?
The thing that really differentiates Visionaries Club from other VCs is that we almost exclusively took on money from entrepreneurs into our fund. So we've got a little bit more than 30 unicorn founders who are invested into the fund. So these are digital leaders from across Europe. And then on the other hand side, we've got more than 25 family business entrepreneurs. So these are industrial leaders who oftentimes inherited large industrial companies and who want to digitize them now. And this gives you an incredible value add as a founder at the very early stage. On the one hand side, because you can call someone up like the Flixbus founders or the UiPath founders or the guys from Adyen, from Spotify, from Miro, and so on and so forth. And you can ask them, look, how did you scale from 10 to 20 people in your sales organization? What were the learnings that you had there? And they will give you answers and insights that no VC in Europe can deliver, right?
Welcome to the EU Startups Podcast. Sit back and enjoy the show hosted by Marcin Lewandowski.
This episode of EU Startups Podcast is brought to you by Vanta. Whether you're starting or scaling your company's security program, demonstrating top-notch security practices and establishing trust is more important than ever. Vanta automates compliance for ISO 27001, SOC 2, and more, saving you time and money, while helping you build customer trust. Plus, you can streamline security reviews by automating questionnaires and demonstrating your security posture with a customer-facing trust center, all powered by Vanta AI. Over 7,000 global companies like Atlassian, Flow Health, and Quora use Vanta to manage risk and prove security in real time. Get a special offer of $1,000 off at vanta.com/EU startups. That's VANTA.com/EU startups.
Hey everyone, this is Marcin Lewandowski and you're listening to the EU Startups Podcast. My guest today just got promoted to a partner at one of the coolest VC funds in Europe, Visionaries Club, at the age of 26, which makes him one of the youngest partners in VC in Europe. Everyone, give it up for Robert Jackle. Bobby, congrats and welcome on the show.
Hey, Marcin. So nice to be on the show. Thank you so much for having me. And thanks for the very kind words in the introduction. Very nice of you.
Awesome. Bobby, so, being promoted to a partner at Visionaries Club at just 26 is a huge deal. What's the craziest or most unexpected thing that happened during your journey, from an intern to a partner?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and it almost starts before joining Visionaries Club. So as you mentioned, I joined as an intern, and the whole ride has been pretty crazy because I never really planned to go into VC or really aim to become an investor. I was always very keen on the entrepreneurial side of things. I worked at a startup before, and I actually the whole involvement came through meeting one of our two founding partners, Mollie, as we like to call him. So as you can tell, we're big on nicknames. And that was in 2019. I was just at a startup in Berlin at Heka in the automotive space. And I was sort of expanding my network, meeting people. And I got introduced to this guy, Sebastian. We sat down for coffee. We just wanted to meet for half an hour. And then we got started we started talking about a variety of different things. We ended up speaking for much longer than that. In the beginning, I was asking him about people he might know for potentially co-founding a startup. And then he was, talking about this new fund that he was setting up, Visionaries Club. And he was saying, why don't you work with us for a bit? And figure out, whether this is something that you like or potentially start a company out of that setup. And then I had the huge privilege of joining them effectively on day zero, Rob and Sebastian, the two founding partners. And it was completely unplanned. There was no interview process or anything like that. So the whole ride for me was already off to a pretty unconventional start. And since then, it's really been a roller coaster, but in the most positive sense of the word. So we set up shop in 2019, end of 2019, and we've grown very quickly. We've had the privilege of working with some of the most inspiring and amazing founders across Europe. And yeah, it's difficult to pinpoint any specific examples that are particularly crazy, but I think the whole progression was very unique and super interesting.
Sounds awesome. Actually, since we are already here, what's your secret sauce for climbing the VC ladder so quickly? You know, if you could go back, and if you could go back to your first day at Visionaries Club, what advice would you give yourself?
Yeah, God, I think two very good questions, and I think the first one I would love to be able to answer that, but I don't think there is a so-called magic sauce. Ultimately, I think the advice that I would give people who are thinking about, you know, be that a career in VC or career anywhere else, I think, you know, you have to. Or let me think how I phrase this the best way. I think the upside potential or the speed at which you can progress in a career or within a given setup is usually pretty correlated or connected to the risk that you take. So I think if you join a super established setup, you know, something where people have been incredibly successful for decades or years, it's usually much harder to get into an interesting position very quickly. And I think if you take risk, if you take entrepreneurial risk, be that within VC or starting your own company or within an early stage startup, you can rise the ranks pretty quickly because there isn't that established layer of hierarchy yet. And it's oftentimes more meritocratic, I would say, than in established organizations. So I think ultimately for people who want to move quickly, one of the ways to do that is to take some risk. And then there's obviously a ton of luck involved, as always, as well. But I think if you have an entrepreneurial mindset, that's how you can move quickly. And then the second part of the question, what advice would I give myself 5 years ago when we set up shop? I mean, that's a great question. And I think ultimately it would be to have as many conversations with people as possible, especially with operators, with founders, with people who are building things. If you're an investor, I think that's the best thing you can do. Just get exposure to as many fantastic builders and operators and founders as you can possibly get, and get a sense of, you know, what great really looks like in that context as well, which I think is an incredibly important experience. So I think that exposure and calibration that comes with it would be my number one advice. And then the other point or the other advice would be to trust yourself and to trust your instincts and your reasoning. I think it's very easy to depend in your decision making and your thinking on others and the thinking and positioning of others. I think this is in general a bit of a disease, I would almost call it, that we have in VC, that there's this herd mentality and people really orient themselves on leaders in the space, and they think, well, if they're liking something, if they are making an investment, then I should be doing that, or vice versa. If they don't like something, I should stay away from it. But I think ultimately the most important thing is to look at opportunities and apply first principle thinking, and really build your own convictions independent of others and stand behind those as well. So I think that's a second advice that for me also took a lot of time over the last years to craft effectively and to stand behind my own convictions and my own opinions. But I think it's super important in this space. It's obviously advice very geared towards the investor side of things, right? But
I love it. So, you know, that's kind of what makes you stand out, right? If you actually stand by your convictions and like you have the courage and to take risks and actually, to trust your gut and follow your opinions, not only like kind of agree with what others have to say. I love it, Bobby. So, Visionaries Club hires based on hunger and passion over experience. How has this contrarian team building strategy influenced your work and the overall success of the fund?
Yeah, I think we're a bit of a unique animal in that sense, and it's something where Rob and Mollie made a very conscious decision early on that they said, look, they would have the opportunity to hire super experienced investors, and they very consciously opted with the two people they brought on board, Martin and myself on the investment side, to take people in who are young on the one hand side, and if anything, who come from the operator side rather than the investment banking side, the consulting side, or the investor side. And I think it's got its pros and its cons, right? I think very fundamentally, it gives an opportunity to an organization to build its own perspective and its own convictions. So as I mentioned, it's very different if you bring on investors who have a prefabricated mindset of what they like looking into, what they think is great, and so on. It's very difficult to mold that into something new. So I think it's allowed us to really set a level of ambition and a target when it comes to the entrepreneurs that we want to work with that is very, very high. And it, I think, also gave us the ability to move very quickly and to be very agile. On the other hand side, of course, we are a very young organization in that regard, and we have a lot of growing up and fast moving to do, which we're working on every single day. And then I think the other point is, we brought a lot of people in who are young and hungry and fresh, but we also complemented that with incredible experience. So just last year, as one example, we brought on board Johan Butting as an expert partner. He was previously internationally, globally leading sales for Slack. He was the European CEO for Dropbox. He brought AdSense Google product to Europe. So an unbelievably experienced go-to-market expert who we bring in to consult with our portfolio companies when it comes to go-to-market and so on. And I think it's this mix of individuals of very young and hungry people on the one hand side and extremely senior and experienced people on the other hand side. And I think that creates a sense of magic that is difficult to replicate if you just hire in a linear fashion from experienced investors.
Love it. Sounds like a recipe for a dream team, Bobby. So I also know that you studied politics, philosophy, and economics at Oxford. Any particular philosophies you've applied to real-world investing? I would lie if I'd say that I frequently go back to any sort of philosophical texts in order to inspire my decision making. But I think two things that still stuck with me from that time, from that university time. I think in the concrete philosophical context that you asked about, it's logic actually. So I was a big fan of. So logic historically has always been a subset of studying philosophy, and I was always a big fan of that at university as well. So really deductive reasoning. How is an argument constructed? How does an argument flow logically, and what premises lead to which conclusions? And I think sometimes that's a hugely valuable skill as an investor, because there's so many unknowns, right, when you make an investment. And in those situations, to have the clarity of mind and a framework where you really think about, well, what are the arguments that have to hold true in order to deduce a conclusion? In our case, that's usually what arguments have to hold true in order to believe that something will end up category defining business, right? Or a business that can produce more than 100 million in annually recurring revenues. And it's exactly that sort of very structured, logical thinking that at least I myself find very helpful. And that's something which I still
look back to. And then generally, I mean, my subject. So yeah, you mentioned I did PPE. So that's 3 subjects in one, which means you don't do anything properly, I guess, and everything a little bit. And I think as an investor, you also have to navigate that sometimes, right? You look into a lot of different things. We're all kind of generalists. And so that skill set of diving from a very high level into some sort of depth quickly, and then also deciding, or having a strong opinion after a certain limited period of time and standing behind that. That's sort of something I did in my degree as well. So that comes in handy now and then. Awesome.
Bobby, so you've led investments in some really cool companies like Leapsome, Hakuna, Apron, and Workflex. So 2 questions here. What qualities do you look for in founders, that signal their potential for success? And the second one would be, can you share a standout moment or a lesson from, working with these startups?
Yeah, for sure. So you mentioned a few of the startups that I led investments in that I closely work with, or I'm sitting on the board. I had the privilege of really at this point working with a couple of fantastic entrepreneurs. And I think what we're ultimately looking for in founders is a variety of things, and it's difficult to break that down to 1 or 2 sentences. But I think a few of the elements that we're quite concretely looking for are, on the one hand side, passion and obsession. So this is incredibly important for us, because ultimately every interesting business opportunity will have several people going for it, right? I mean, you're not going to be the only one who will chase an opportunity if it presents itself. And if 10 or 20 great teams globally are chasing an opportunity, and they're all super duper CVs and great experience and so on, but you've got one team that is incredibly obsessed and incredibly passionate about an opportunity, that team will most likely win, right? Because when they go home, they will think about the product, or they will think about the business. When they're spending their weekends or their vacations, they will think about it. They will constantly have this drive and this passion to move the company and the product forward. And I don't want to make that sound, that almost sounds unhealthy, right? Entrepreneurs who don't take time off on the weekends, or that's not what I mean. It's almost exactly this healthy obsession, right? When someone just loves doing something so much and is so obsessed with a product that they will pour all of their energy and their lifeblood into it. That's just something which is incredibly difficult to beat if you don't have that. So I think that's definitely one facet. So we look for people who really subscribe to their own vision. And then I think the other element is also being able to communicate that. So you can be super passionate and super obsessed with a product, but you also need to be able to inspire others, right? The greatest example of that is probably someone like Steve Jobs, right? But we see that time and time again in our portfolio of people who are just so great at telling a story and selling their vision and selling their product. And why is that so important? Well, ultimately, if you're a founder, you, whether you like it or not, will have to engage in a lot of sales activities, so to speak. Not only in the traditional sense, of course, you have to sell to your customers and so on, but you will also have to sell to amazing talent. Because I don't know, if I wanted to convince you now to join my startup, you have a ton of opportunity cost, right? Because you're a fantastic profile, you do amazing things in your life. And so I will have to convince you that what I'm doing is the greatest opportunity for you right now. Or for example, if I go out fundraising, right? Same story. I have to pitch people who have tons of opportunity cost associated with investing into me and my business. So I better have a great story ready, and a great way of pitching my vision. So I think this ability to storytell and articulating your vision is definitely a second characteristic that we are really looking for in founders. And then the third one, I'm just highlighting a couple of elements. This is not comprehensive, so to speak. But the third one is definitely this. Internally, we call it Zug zum Tor. So this is a German expression, but it means so much as a drive to execute, right? And actually getting stuff done. And this is something that we also think is super important. There are people who are incredibly intelligent, incredibly talented, but they are just a little bit too cerebral about how they approach things, right? They just think a little bit too much almost. And we believe that especially in that 0 to 1 phase, you just need to get stuff done and you need to get, the power on the road. So this ability to quickly iterate, to quickly deliver, and to also, of course, the typical idea of moving fast and breaking things. I think that's definitely something that we look for as well. So this ability to execute quickly.
Amazing. I love how you break that down for us. Bobby, so let's have some fun and switch roles for a second. If you had to pitch Visionaries Club to founders in just 1 minute, what would your elevator pitch sound like?
Yeah, that's great challenge. But the elevator pitch is ultimately that we've all come from the founder and the operator side at Visionaries Club. We saw what venture capital is like from that perspective, and we just thought there's an entrepreneurial opportunity, namely in the ability to deliver value add that goes beyond money when we invest. And that value that we deliver to founders is ultimately a value of network and connections. The thing that really differentiates Visionaries Club from other VCs is that we almost exclusively took on money from entrepreneurs into our fund. So we've got a little bit more than 30 unicorn founders who are invested into the fund. So these are digital leaders from across Europe. And then on the other hand side, we've got more than 25 family business entrepreneurs. So these are industrial leaders who oftentimes inherited large industrial companies and who want to digitize them now. And this gives you an incredible value add as a founder at the very early stage. On the one hand side, because you can call someone up like the Flixbus founders or the UiPath founders, or the guys from Adyen, from Spotify, from Miro, and so on and so forth. And you can ask them, look, how did you scale from 10 to 20 people in your sales organization? What were the learnings that you had there? And they will give you answers and insights that no VC in Europe can deliver, right? So this ability to contact those who have built billion-dollar businesses in the European context, that's one. And then on the other hand side, it's the family business entrepreneurs. It's the backbone of our European economy. And the ability to speak to them, to ideate, to see whether the product that you're building, a B2B software product, which is what we invest in, is interesting to them, whether they could be first ideal customers or not. Incredibly valuable. And then also the ability to very quickly sign contracts with them through this network that we've established. That's ultimately what we deliver with Visionaries. So this connection between old and new, old economy and new economy, but also the now old school digital startup founders with the new generation of startup founders. And yeah, as I mentioned in the beginning, all ex-operators and ex-founders, and we're all still building Visionaries Club as a business. And so the empathy that we can bring to a board or when working with a founder, what it means to take risks when you're building a business, I think it's just slightly different to someone who's been an investor their entire life, and who doesn't have that experience. And so ultimately, that's what we bring to the table. We invest that through a seed fund on the one hand side, an early growth stage fund on the other hand side. We're very focused with our investments. We only make few investments every year, but then we are very committed. We bring in that network and we bring in sort of our time and our energy 100% with every investment that we make.
Amazing. Love the pitch.
That was longer than a minute, I think, but
Club, right?
I cheated.
Yeah, you went over time a bit, but it's okay. And that's why it's called Visionaries Club, right? That's
exactly right. So it's called Visionaries Club.
People.
Certainly not describing ourselves, but all those people that we've taken on board who really belong to the most exceptional entrepreneurs, be that from the old or the new economy in Europe. And we live it, we breathe that spirit. So it's and that's the big differentiator. We're not a VC that's been around for 20, 30 years and is now realizing, the market is super competitive. We need to be more founder friendly. We need to create a quote unquote value add. From the get-go, we created this fund around this network, and it's the basis of the fund. And we do events, we bring these people together, we activate that network on a weekly basis. And that's ultimately what drives the value for our portfolio. So that's what Visionaries Club is in a nutshell.
Love it. And speaking of investments, Bobby, so you focus on FinTech, HR, and compliance, right?
Yeah, so those are certainly a couple of the topics I focused on a lot in the last 5 years, and that I'm still very committed to looking into. We are all generalists, so it's not the case that we just exclusively, for example, that I would only be looking at those three categories, but they're a bit of a focus area, that's right to say.
Okay, so actually, like, what emerging trends in these sectors or other sectors are you most excited about? And like, which sector do you think will have the most mind-blowing innovations in the next few years?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. Maybe just taking a step back. The reason why I'm personally so excited about those areas, so FinTech, accounting, HR software, compliance software. I mean, they're generally, I think a lot of people would consider these areas quite boring, right? But I'm very excited about them because they touch almost every business, right? Almost every business needs some sort of accounting and finance function, HR function. Almost every business, increasingly so, also will have to deal with compliance questions. And the thing that these areas also all have in common is they're usually not core to business. So they're not usually what drives the core value of a business, not usually the service or the product of a business. And so what I love about digitization solutions in those areas is that it frees up time and resources of businesses to focus on the core of what they're delivering and what they're providing. And this is just something which I think is absolutely beautiful and amazing. So if you use a product like you alluded to, Apron, for example, that really helps you with your accounts payable, you speak to customers of that product and they're saving hours every single week because of that product. And they're also paying less. And those are the situations where you can really drive efficiency for businesses, and you can drive the fun that people have when running their business. So that's really the motivation. And I think when it comes to the trends that I'm seeing or the things that I'm most excited about in those areas, it's ultimately really to, I guess you can answer these two ways, right? Innovations in the sense that, what are the technological innovations? But I'm always more excited about innovations in the sense of what does the thing deliver in the end, right? So for example, with something like Uber, you could say, well, the innovation is an application and it's cloud hosted, or there's loads of technological innovations that drive the product. But the innovation is really, I can get out my phone, I can get in a taxi within a minute or 5 minutes wherever I am. And I think if we frame innovation in that sense, what I'm super excited about in those areas is that I think 5 or 7, maybe it's 10 years down the line, mid-sized businesses, I don't think will need tax accountants anymore. I don't think they will need lawyers anymore. I don't think they will need compliance consultants anymore, because they will be able to automate these functions to an extremely high degree. And that's something that I'm just super passionate and excited about when I look at the types of businesses that we're working with, because they're really pushing the edge when it comes to exactly that vision and that innovation of removing the cost and burden for these businesses in these segments.
Awesome. Bob, you answered partially my next question, I think, because it was about, Visionaries Club's manifesto that speaks, of Europe's strong position to shape the next wave of B2B disruption. And I wanted to ask you, about one bold prediction you'd make for European tech in the next 5 years. And what role do you see Visionaries Club playing in this transformation?
Yeah, obviously, always very dangerous to make predictions, right? Because then you can be
it's
very wrong.
But a crystal ball, as an investor.
But I think ultimately one of the predictions I would make is that there's a good chance that European software companies will be or could be globally leading when it comes to compliance. Or compliance software from Europe that will take a globally leading position. And why do I believe that? Because I think, well, first of all, you've got great, fantastic teams in Europe working, on compliance topics. So be that, in the information security space, in the data privacy space, be that in the ESG space, or generally the sustainability space, or also in the AI space. I think there are fantastic teams who are working on this. But first and foremost, the reality is just Europe just has a ton of regulation, and increasingly so. And so we are often the first who are faced with this reality. But increasingly so, a lot of the standards that are established in Europe are also exported across the world. So I think we just have a bit of a first mover advantage when it comes to things like a GDPR, that you see in various formations across the globe now, or with something like the CSRD framework that is coming into effect. Those are things that will have ripple effects across the world, and where, similar frameworks will get adopted. And so I think with that first mover advantage, I hope that these great teams in Europe will seize the opportunity and will become, category leaders, not just in Europe, but globally for these types of frameworks. And I think that's something which is really, really exciting, because it will affect a lot of businesses, and especially, with climate change and the environmental strides that we will have to take. I think software in that space is very interesting, and there's a lot of promise with it.
Amazing. Bobby, so change the topic a bit. I know that you were on Oxford's tennis and ski racing teams. How do your skills on the court and slopes, how do you think, or if at all, your skills, on the court and slopes translate to your moves as a VC? And maybe can you share some of your most epic wins and wipeouts when it comes to investing so far?
I'm not sure whether it says that on our website, but that is, I think I have to preface that, with saying that I was never a great athlete. I wish I had been. But I would have always described myself as mediocre at best at these disciplines. I had the privilege of playing with some fun teams, and always really enjoyed it. But I think ultimately, with those sports, it's interesting because they are in a way solo sports, but there's also a team element to them, right? So it's I think in some ways also comparable to the art of investing, because there's a lot of individual work, and you need to find your own convictions, and you need to ski your own line, so to speak, or hit your own balls. But then there's also an incredibly important team element to it, and training together, getting better together, working as a team, even though there's these solo elements. So I think that there's a bit of an analogy there. And I think, when it comes to the biggest wins and wipeouts, you asked as an investor, right? I think, that's a really difficult one to answer. I mean, from my personal portfolio, it's not the case that I've had to experience insolvencies yet, but I mean that will come, and I think that's also natural situation if you take bold. If you make bold investments and you're working at the forefront of innovation, some things just don't necessarily work out. And I think I guess the question there is also what counts as an epic wipeout in investing. I guess those situations where you thought something was extremely successful and was already very far progressed as a company, but then unfortunately didn't quite make it. I haven't personally been in that situation. And conversely, the companies that we've invested in the last 4 or 5 years, we've seen fantastic growth, and a couple of companies like Pigment, for example, or like Tacto, or like Apron that you mentioned. And I'm not. These are just a few that are coming to mind now from our portfolio. They've developed incredibly well. But what we ultimately want, and what we are ultimately in the business of, is trying to find and support category defining companies. So companies that are really shaping that category, and that just takes some time, right? So I think in order to ultimately declare a win, or say, we've really, really succeeded as an investor. I think it's just a matter of time, and you always hear for that to really transpire. And I think you always hear these stories, companies that are growing in 2 years, and decacorns and whatever. But the reality is, in most cases, it just takes time to build great businesses. And so, I think it's just still a little bit too early to answer that question fully.
Okay, I got you. But then maybe so it's important to celebrate the small wins along the way, while waiting for a big one.
100%, and I think we've had the privilege of celebrating so many of them. So as I mentioned, Pigment raising an incredible amount of money and growing like crazy in the last few years, or a company like Apron that I mentioned, at this point transacting hundreds of millions over its platform, and they only launched, not even, I think 3 years ago was when we did the pre-seed investment, and just building such a phenomenal product that is already helping hundreds of small businesses and accountants, or a company like Workflex that you mentioned, that is just growing incredibly well, and that is just helping so many businesses with their compliance on the HR side. Those are really, for us, the wins, right? The wins is seeing the impact that these products and these businesses are having that they're having every day.
That sounds awesome, Mollie. I've been really enjoying this conversation. We're actually we just came to the last question. Do you have any projects that you're currently working on, like either within or outside of Visionaries Club, that you're excited about and you'd like to share with our audience?
Yeah, I think, that's ultimately I think one of the big privileges as an investor, right? You get to work on so many fantastic projects, so to speak, and so many businesses are sharing their journey and learnings with you, and I'm always incredibly grateful for that. And just now, for example, today actually closed and wired a great new investment in the accounting and tax space. Unfortunately, I can't say too much about it yet, but that's definitely a new project on
you tell
my
me
end.
After we stop recording, right?
100%. And that's definitely for myself, an additional project that I will be working on, and will be working very closely with the company. And then in addition to that, I think projects internally, that's one of the things that we all love at Visionaries as well. We are all really entrepreneurs and VCs. So we're building this company. It's not a finished product, so to speak.
Right.
And so we just actually hired 2 fantastic new people. Again, this will be announced further down the line on the operational side. So, helping us with our communications on the one hand side, and, one person who's joining us as a chief of staff. And these are actually also the types of projects which I personally really enjoy working on, supporting the business to progress and to grow, and to help build up this long-term vision of Visionaries Club that we're trying to deliver on every single day.
Amazing, Bobby. Congrats on the new investment, Dan. And it's been such a pleasure to meet you and to get to know you better. I've been a fan of Visionaries Club for some time already. Now I'm also a fan of yours. Thanks so much for taking the time. Lovely to meet you, and I hope to talk to you soon.
Thank you so much for having me. Really, really appreciate it.
Bye.